everybody. We are so glad that you are with us this month as we continue our Adobe Conversations. This month, we're talking about how to live on mission, how to live for Jesus out in the world, and specifically even in your workplace. And so we've actually just had this conversation, so I can guarantee you it's going to be awesome. It's going to encourage you. It's going to uplift you. There's going to be some practical applications for you to take from this conversation. And so as we get ready to jump into that conversation, I want to introduce you to a couple people. They're going to tell you who they are and a little bit about themselves. Would you guys do that real quick? Let everyone know who you are, what you do, and how come you're so awesome.
My name is Jackie Hall, and I'm a special education teacher.
I'm Nicole Jackson. I am a local photographer and a part of the worship team here at Adobe.
All right, let's jump into our conversation. Awesome. Well, I'm so glad you guys are here. Excited to have this conversation with you. Thanks for coming in to have it. Nicole, thanks for wearing your shirt. I didn't tell you in advance, but I was thinking all week, I was like, oh, we're talking about like sharing Jesus out in public or at work. And I should have told Nicole to wear one of her shirts, but good job. You didn't disappoint.
Thank you.
And if you're listening, only her shirt says Hope Dealer. So, well, guys, we're going to talk a little bit about what it is to work kind of out in the world and how to be a Christian. In this area that we're in, it can be challenging sometimes. You can be met with resistance. You might work in a place that you're not allowed to do certain things. And so I just want to talk about that so that as people listen, maybe they get ideas, or we just want to build that confidence muscle in people too. Like, okay, someone's doing it. Someone's talking about Jesus. Maybe I could do that as well. The best way to start would be just share like a testimony or something of when you've been out and about, when you've been in your workplace, where you got to talk about Jesus and maybe it went well. And then even if you have a testimony where it went horrible, that's good too, because it's not always going to go great when you talk about Jesus.
I would want to say, first of all, that I love being in a job where I have interface with people who have not yet met the Lord. For 20 years, I was a homeschool mom, and every single person I knew was already a Christian. Their kids all knew the Lord, which was wonderful. But it's just really awesome to be in a setting where there are people who still need to hear. And I have that a lot in my workplace. COVID provided amazing opportunities to share my faith, actually, because so many of, not even my coworkers as much as my students and the families that I work with, were in crisis. And I had students whose mental health was just really on the line. And I think of one young man in particular who that year he had just family tragedy after family tragedy on top of COVID. So it was just a great opportunity to come alongside that family and just share my faith, ask if I could pray with them. They were always open to prayer, and just kind of lavish this young man and the family with love. I would send them gift cards, I'd send them pizza, I'd send them grocery cards, and just include an encouraging message. So it's a pretty awesome opportunity.
Yeah, I would have probably become a Christian sooner if people sent me pizza and gift cards and were nice. That would have been awesome.
And thinking about this answer, there's a couple different ways I can go. One would be back when I was an employee at an office. I had my office space, and there was, in particular, one human that would always come to my space and would have the foulest language. And there was a debate within me of, do I just show him love and hope he changes, or do I speak up for myself, which in turn speaks up for the Lord? And I asked him, hey, when you're in my space, is there any way you could watch your language? Because that's really offensive to me. It kind of goes against my grain. And at first he got really mad at me for trying to change who he was. But I worked there about a year, and by the end, really within a couple of weeks, I noticed him slowly changing, because I didn't just ask the question, I continued to love him. And when he's in his space or somewhere else, I didn't ask him to change anything, just in my own office. He did eventually stop swearing around me at all, no matter where I was, even apologized when I was in his office. And by the time I had left, he actually came to me and asked me for prayer at one point, because it wasn't just about standing up for something, but also, like you were talking about, showing love. On the flip side, as a business owner now, there was a couple that came for maternity photos, and they weren't married, but I kept forgetting that and saying husband and wife. And I just said, I was raised in a really traditional Christian home, so my brain just goes there. And I can kind of fall back on, I was raised, because people won't be as offended by me saying this is just who I was raised to be, as opposed to, well, I'm a Christian, And they actually ended up telling me, they're like, don't worry about it. Our parents feel just like, would rather us be married too. What I didn't know was their parents weren't necessarily praying for their salvation, but they each had a grandparent who was praying. Being on the worship team allows me to say, hey, I'm singing this week if you want to come. And turns out that the husband had sung as a youth in a boys' choir, and they came. So it started with me saying husband and wife and standing up for the way I believe it should be. I don't know, I don't want to put anyone out on that, but that's how I believe. They ended up coming to church. They accepted the Lord here. The husband was actually in our worship team for a while before they moved away, and now they're raising 2 boys in church. So I think just being willing to speak can change a life that's just waiting for someone to speak.
Yeah, that's really good. I am shocked the amount of people who find out I'm a pastor and used to stop swearing around me and now don't care at all. They're like, he'll be fine. And I am. And I'm almost the opposite because I'm a pastor now. I feel like I almost can't, if I say like, hey, if I'm out, like you said, I think in their space,
Yeah.
It used to be if people heard I was a pastor out and about at a golf course or wherever, they would feel bad and stop swearing. And now I'm like, I can't, if I tell them I'm a pastor, they suddenly change. And so it's a different thing for me, but I did used to work in the secular world too. I worked at a retail place and I was the only Christian there. And I remember one of the ways, I just was a new Christian, so I didn't know anything. So I'd just tell people, or I'd act different sometimes because I was becoming a little bit better version of who I am now. And so they'd invite me to go do different things. I'd be like, I don't really want to do that. But I remember the way that I did it was I just did the best I could do. I had the best sales numbers for any part-time staff people. The manager loved, right? I didn't talk back. I didn't talk bad to customers. And so for me, it was just I'm just going to learn how to be a Christian in this secular environment or this worldly environment. And it was pretty cool because I felt so different in that. See, if you've been a Christian for a while, you just maybe know you're different or you choose to act different. I became different over a couple years there. And it was just neat to see them respond or change different how they would normally be or normally talk. And I stopped getting invites to all the wild parties. And it's no, you can still invite me. I'm just not going to come. And so it's just a unique thing, right? To live for Jesus in environments outside of church. And in this area where there's lots of people who aren't Christians. Let me ask you this. How do you do it? Because so many people are afraid, not of living for Jesus, but of sharing their faith, of doing it wrong, of what will they think. And so how do you combat those feelings that I'm sure you still have them, you still deal with them, but I think that's pretty common to everybody who's I don't know how to do this, or I'm afraid. What do you do when you're afraid to do it or do it wrong?
Well, I would say I wish I did it better, for sure. And it's really depending on the Lord and looking for those open doors. We just went through a Bible study as a staff that talks about finding out where God is at work and getting on board with what the Lord is doing, which I think that is one really important aspect. So I always watch for openings. And Nicole mentioned prayer. Prayer is a great way, because if you ask someone if you can pray for them, you don't have to tell them you're a Christian or say anything about your faith, but they kind of get the idea. And I've gotten to pray in person out loud for lots of coworkers, which has been really wonderful. Nicole also mentioned prayer, and I had a really cool thing happen 7 or 8 years ago. New staff person came, and I was actually her mentor. And I found out almost immediately that she was also a believer. So we began praying consistently for all of our coworkers. And it's really easy to do because I work with amazing people. They are super caring. They're amazing professionals. They're very compassionate and loving. So it's really easy to pray for them and to really want them to know the Lord. We just began praying and prayed and prayed and prayed. And I would say sometime this summer, finally, one of them accepted the Lord, which has been pretty awesome and amazing. And she's just moving forward in a wonderful relationship with God. So I think prayer is a big deal, big part of it.
Yeah. I think for me, one of the things that I always remember is to do it scared. Fail forward, all the things people say, right? I always, like you said, I always feel like I could do it better. I always feel convicted of what I didn't do. I'll think of things later. There's a movie where they talk about always remembering the zingers after the moment's gone, and that's me.
Yeah.
Both the bad things and the good things, I think more of them later when I'm already done. I'm like, darn it, that would have been so cool. But I thought of one man as you were saying that. Aaron and I were leaving something that we went to, and there was a man on the street, and the Lord put it on my heart to speak to him. And but when I say the Lord put it on my heart, there's just this feeling, oh man, really? That you want? Okay. There's always a battle for me, because I am a human that if I see somebody that's hurting, regardless if I feel like the Lord told me or it's just my own thought, and then I also wrestle with, is this me? But it doesn't matter. Being kind is cool no matter what, right?
Yeah.
But I walked past the man, and then I told Aaron, hang on a minute. And I turned around and went back, fully shaking myself because I was nervous about what I needed to do. And I just went and asked him if I could talk to him, and told him that I really felt compelled to come ask if he was okay. And he allowed me to pray for him. Again, like I didn't say, I'm a Christian and go into my whole story. I just asked him, he told me some struggles in his family, and I asked him if I could pray. So it boils down to, for me, I have asked the Lord to please trust me with hearts and show me what I can't see, to be able to know that I can move forward, because if he's asked me to do it, he's going to help me do it, whether I do it right with my quote fingers in the air for those who are listening, or what I see as wrong. I don't think there is a wrong. I think right is when you say, okay, Lord, and you just take a step in the direction that he's asking you to go. And for the most part, I'm always scared doing it, but I feel amazing when it's done.
You said you do it afraid, so that's one. You both mentioned prayer. So many people are just afraid to pray out loud. And I do think that it's probably one of the easiest ways to live your faith out isn't to go tell people I'm a Christian. It isn't let me preach the gospel at you. It is being available to pray in times of need, or noticing that they're in need of prayer maybe, and then using that to I'm available. I believe in God. I'll talk to God for you. Did you start off that way, afraid to pray out loud? How'd you overcome that fear? Because if that is maybe one of the easiest tools that people could take from this of, okay, I don't have to talk about Jesus up front right away, but if I make myself available for prayer, that's a good tool for living on mission. But then we got to address the people are afraid to pray out loud. How'd you overcome that? And maybe it's back to I just did it afraid, or like I did it out of obedience, or I didn't want to, but people are more important. Like, what does that look like for you? How do you get over that first fear of praying out loud for people?
Well, the cool thing is the more you do it, the more, for me, it's just like talking to a person now, really. And, I didn't start out that way. Yeah, practice. The more you do, the easier it gets.
I was raised by a mom and dad who were never afraid to pray. And in particular, my mom. Anyone who sees this that knows my mom will be laughing right about now, because she found pretty much the scariest humans. There was one person, I was walking with her one day and she goes, "Oh, there's Scary Sherry. I want to introduce you." And at the time, I think I was about 14, and she went this way and I went the other way because I'm like, not ready for that. She was always an example of prayer. And I had the benefit of being raised in church and also being behind a microphone since I was like 2 years old. I'm not afraid of the action of praying. My fear point is from the point where I'm standing somewhere and the Lord says, go to that person. My fear point is just going to the person and starting the conversation. I'm not at all afraid of prayer, but that's where we all get to overcome whatever our fear point is. But for me, thankfully, praying out loud is not a big deal.
Yeah, well, in the talking to strangers, maybe because we were drilled as kids, you don't talk to strangers. It's my probably hardest thing, and some of it's personality. And as people are listening, I think I'm going to preach a little bit about it in the coming weeks in the series we're in on living on mission. We're not even asking people, and for the most part, Jesus isn't telling the average person in the average encounter, go talk to every stranger at the restaurant that you're sitting in, or everyone at the grocery store. It comes back to like what you said. If the Lord compels you, like you feel that unction to like someone pops out, or I like to think of it as like they're highlighted, right? And so you got to pay attention to that. But for the most part, that's not really what most people need to do. And for me, when the Lord tells me, I don't want to do it. People are like, oh, it's so easy. It's the worst. And I think I've preached this story before, but I'll share it now because I used to be in college back in the old days, and there were no Christians there. And I came back from this weekend conference. God healed me supernaturally. And there was a girl who was deaf in the front row of my math class. And the Lord said, go talk to her. I'm like, Lord, like you do all the explaining, right? Like, Lord, she can't hear, like, let me help you out. And I know, like I saw in my mind, like the Lord healing her, and I just couldn't do it. I was too afraid. And so I think when it comes to this living on mission, like it's a process. You got to grow that muscle, right? The more you pray for people. And it's also easier now for me, right? When the Lord tells me to do stuff I don't want to do. If it doesn't go well, it's his problem. And I think that's a key to living on mission is like, we're just going to live for Jesus. When opportunities arise, we're going to step into them. Like Jackie said, we read that devotional, and God's always at work. And so it's only when we recognize it that we have to do anything. But it's being willing then to step into it. And then it's his job to make it go well. Like if it doesn't go well, if we say the wrong things, that's fine. I've said the wrong things all the time. People still hear the gospel. They hear Jesus. They hear things I didn't say all the time. My messages are way better than they actually are because people tell me things I said that I know I didn't say. Like I have a manuscript, like it's not in the notes. And so it is just that willingness and obedience and faithfulness to the Lord. But you both said something I want to come back to about recognizing the Lord telling you to do something, feeling it, hearing it, noticing something. Mm-hmm. How do you recognize when it's the Spirit, and maybe when it's right? It's not even bad if it's your own doing. Like you can manufacture evangelism and live it on mission. It might not be as productive, but like we're ultimately compelled by the Bible to always share the good news. So we can always do it, and you're not like out of God's will. But how do you notice those interactions or those instances or the people or the situations where you're like, oh, God is really moving right now and I have to to get involved.
One thing that I've had happen that I just appreciate so much, and I think this maybe comes out of having prayed for people. I have one particular coworker that I just love to pieces like a daughter. And somehow, for every single crisis that she has faced, I happen to be right there, or the first person that she runs into. It's totally a God thing. And so when you have someone in front of you who is dissolving in tears, that's a pretty good sign that you need to pray, that you need to share. A lot of it is trusting God in that. I have had the Lord just put on my heart and kind of compel me to do some uncomfortable things. And in a way, that's another signal that it's the Lord, that I know it's not me, like give this non-Christian person this very Christian book. I want you to give her this book. Or before you give her the book, I want you to write out your testimony and put that in the book. Things that in my natural self I wouldn't want to do just because I would be afraid of the rejection. But, God just has a way of being persistent to where you get the idea, oh yeah, this is something he really wants me to do, so I better do it.
I think what you said about almost like a highlight of like the beam can come on a human, it doesn't really happen, but you're drawn to a person. For instance, for me is, I know we're talking about work, but a grocery store situation came to my mind. There's hundreds of people in a grocery store, but one woman went past and I'm like, phew. And this is the time I failed. I saw her and I felt like I should go communicate with her. And I'm like, I don't know if that's me or the Lord. Lord, bring her around again and then I'll know it's you. And he totally did. And I was still like, coincidence. I bailed on that human, kind of like your hearing situation, the woman who was deaf in the ear. And I have watched for her now ever since, because I knew I was supposed to talk to her because it was like a tractor beam on this woman. And for how I felt afterwards, that it's like a letdown. I'm like, oh man. But also to that point, I remember being younger and wanting the Lord to use me more. And I lived a lot of my life, and still do, with some level of anxiety with people, especially, like you said, strangers, and fear of failure, all those things. So I prayed, Lord, please help me to hear you, even if it's just little. And my mom had told me at one point, like the idea of be faithful with little and he'll give you more. So I prayed that the Lord would just show me little ways that I could hear him and do something. And it started with, like, I'd see a woman and obviously she had put on a special thing in her hair or a special lipstick, and you could tell she wanted to look nice. So I'd get just the feeling that I should tell her she looked pretty today. And so it was little things that started. And for me, I don't know if I know this actually won't happen every time. The Lord's been really faithful with me, with baby steps with things. So it started in baby steps, and literally this woman who had done her hair and her makeup, and I went up to her because I felt like I was supposed to tell her she was beautiful, and I did, and she started to totally cry. And I'm like, that wasn't the point. But then over time, more and more bigger things like giving a book or telling a testimony or reaching out to somebody who looks really scary to me and I don't know how. The ideas grew, and it really is like an idea. And you've shared before that sometimes you'll know it's the Lord because it's not a normal idea for you. And that's kind of where this falls too. Like, I wouldn't naturally go to somebody who scares me. I wouldn't choose to just walk up to somebody who scares me to tell them, you're really scary, but Jesus loves you. That's not normal. So if I see an individual who I would never think to go up to, but my heart says they need you today, then that's how I know it's the Lord.
Yeah, well, that's one of the most common ways to hear, like, if it's the Lord, is if it's a good thing that's not what you would normally do. Well, like, our fallen world's not convincing you to do that. Satan certainly isn't telling you go tell someone about the Lord or offer to pray for him. And so I find that's the easiest way to sift through, is it the Lord? Is it something I don't want to do that's good? probably the Lord. Right, one of my favorite verses is in Hebrews. It says that the Lord only asks things of us that require faith, right? And so it's like, if I can manufacture it and do it on my own, then it's probably not the Lord. It might still be good to do. It still might be biblical. But if it's like not normally me, it's going to take faith. And the bummer part is like what you said, afterwards, you totally know if it had been the Lord when you missed it, because you do feel that let down, and maybe it's guilt, and it's not condemnation. That doesn't come from the Lord. We probably condemn ourselves when you're like, oh, I knew that was the Lord. I missed it. And I'm going to look for that person forever now. But sometimes those are one moment, right? You have to catch that person in that moment to say that thing for the Lord to unlock that thing. Now, I learned early on, we will miss those moments or those opportunities. It doesn't mean God doesn't have somebody else at some other time, but he is looking for willing participants. And I think part of the reason we wanted you guys to come in today is you've made yourselves available to the Lord, willing to say yes. And that's hard to do sometimes because we aren't always willing participants, to be uncomfortable, to look foolish, to potentially say the wrong thing, right? Like you might do your best. You might have stepped into the opportunity. You still might blow it. It's okay. Jesus is still the king. Yeah. We don't have to be perfect. What are some practical ways, simple ways, and you've shared some in some of what you already shared, but let's like break them down. If we were making a list, here are some easy ways for me to share my faith or to talk about Jesus or to represent Jesus out in society, at work. Like, let's go through some list items. Like, what are some of those things that are just easy that people could take away?
As a precursor to that, I like to remember the scripture that talks about how one person sows or plants and another person reaps the harvest. So just to take some of the pressure off, it's not like we have to do the whole thing. And sometimes we're the very first Christian that people have ever met. So even things like just kindness, being the best you can be at your job, like you said. And I mean, this is very convicting even saying it because I feel like just such an inadequate ambassador for Christ. I mean, if we're supposed to be replicating Christ, wow, yeah, I do a crummy job at that.
We're just trying to be like you be more like Jesus.
Well, you know that I fall short. And so there's that, conviction, even telling people, that I'm a believer because I'm not all that I should be. But building those relationships and just loving people is kind of foundational. This is in the workplace where you're going to have ongoing contact. Yeah. And it's almost like there's no substitute for that. We got to invest, we got to really be there for people and love people. And
are you saying Christians can't be jerks?
Yeah, well, I loved what you weren't there, but Steve Edwards shared that nowhere in the Bible does it say that we're supposed to be weird. So we want to not be weird. I
personally think weird Christians are weird. I don't think it's a good testimony or witness to Jesus. If you're weird, a normal person's not going to be like, let me sign up for that. Yeah. Don't be weird.
Just, loving people, kindness, trying to be the best you can be at your job and in your relationships.
And to speak to being the best when I was in sales, it was for the commission. Yeah. And then it just worked out like the Lord blessed me. But yeah, if you excel at work, people take note, right? You notice people, the rising stars or whatever, the people who you like to work with. There is a difference for sure. Good. So be the best at where you work. Be kind. Don't be weird. Those are good pieces of advice. Nicole, what would you maybe add?
I think adding on our reactions to things, like it falls in line with being kind, but our reactions to things, being slow to anger, taking a second to think before we just blurt out any kind of communication. There's not a lot of times in normal life where people just take a minute and then respond. There's a lot of just biting back all the time about anything, about dumb things, about big things. Everybody just always has something to say. So I think if you take a second, definitely be slow to anger, and then really take a second to think before you speak, and take yourself out of the equation. If you're really wanting to represent the Lord, being in your word so you'll know what he's about, and then taking a second, the bracelets we used to wear, what would Jesus do? What would Jesus say in the moment? And representing him well with our responses and reactions, I think is pretty huge. Being kind, being good at what you do, and then also just being willing to be willing to be your authentic Christian self in all the different ways that looks like. A for instance with me on that is at my studio, I used to always play just what was on the normal radio station. And the Lord kind of convicted my heart, like, why do you turn your Christian music off when people are coming? I'm like, oh, because I didn't want to offend anyone. But then I started playing my liked songs on Spotify, which are pretty much all Christian. And I have some that's just music, the background, whatever. And one of the days, my makeup artist and the client was sitting there like, man, Nicole, your music just makes me feel so peaceful. And so I started laughing actually. And I told them, I'm like, that's worship songs. What you don't know is I'm singing all the words in my head while you guys are doing what you're doing. And then I was able to tell them about church. So just being authentically myself and not being afraid of what that means, even if people will probably attack me here or there, you know? So I think that matters a lot because people don't trust people. And if we are the friend to the person who's going through hard times consistently, and we're there over time and we don't shift with the world, that speaks, I think, some of the largest words that we can say, just being there for them.
Well, being authentically yourself, if you're really a Christian, it's really easy to just represent Jesus well. It's when you fake it at church on Sunday and you're not living it elsewhere, if you're not ever reading the Bible and like being conformed to Jesus and instead of being shaped by the world. But I think that's where the weirdness comes in too, is like people manufacture these like Christian experiences and just like be yourself and be a likable human, and people might want to like Jesus also, is a pretty good rule of thumb. How often would you say you're like full out sharing a testimony of here's what God's done in my life, here's how I came to know Jesus, versus just kind of living Christ-like, like ever? Back in the maybe early 2000s, it was this book came out, How to Be a Contagious Christian. We taught everybody how to do your elevator testimony, right? 1 minute before Jesus, 1 minute how you got saved, 1 minute what Jesus has changed in your life and why he's so amazing. And we taught everyone, here's this 3-minute elevator pitch, and just be ready to share it everywhere you go. I don't think one testimony came back of anyone we did like a 9-week small group thing. It was forever. No one came back and was like, oh, I shared my elevator testimony. Everyone in my workplace got saved. It was so amazing. So we set some pretty like hard expectations if you think that's what you're going to do when you go to work and your job is to like win the office to Jesus. And maybe you're supposed to do that, but I don't know. How often are you finding yourself doing that?
Not very often. I mean, I have had people ask. I mean, I've just had people flat out ask me about, well, how did you become a Christian, or my spiritual walk? And of course, that's what we love to hear, right? But typically that would be the context where I would share that.
If asked, but you're not going about ready to like fling it at someone like, you put me in an elevator and I'm going to hit you with a 3-minute speech.
Yeah, not so much.
Okay.
Not so much.
That verges on the weird. That verges on the weird. I'm mainly just being kind and letting my life speak for my truth, which is Jesus.
The truth.
The truth. My truth is the truth. Thankfully, I'm not confused.
It's good to be the right one.
I'm in on the right truth. But my shirts, I'm shy by nature. In situations like this, or 2 or 3 people, I'm totally fine, and I probably talk too much. probably. In large groups, if you throw me in a party, I'll probably sit on the side unless I've got people that make me feel comfortable. But my shirts, reason why I got them is to start conversation for me. Being a mom of young boys, the boys used to start conversations because people would start talking to them. When they got bigger and went to school, I'm like, nobody's talking to me. And for instance, with this particular shirt, 2 of them, I was in the gym and I'm wearing my Hope Dealer shirt, and this guy I saw him coming towards me. I'm like, what's happening? And he goes, it's really bizarre that you wore that shirt today because I was just saying I need more hope in my life. And so in that situation, like you said, like he started it. So I started conversation with him, and Matthew, my son, and I both talked to him about the hope of the Lord. And then another time I was going to visit somebody in the hospital, and I'm having to go through the security gate thing. The security guard's there, and he goes, how much for a gram? And I didn't know what he was talking about. And I'm like, did they see something in my bag? Like, what's going on? And then he goes, your shirt.
Oh.
And I felt my face get excited because I love how he asked me. And I'm like, it's free, and we started having a conversation. So my shirts are great conversation starters for me, but even with that, it's not an elevator pitch of my testimony, probably mainly because oftentimes I don't really feel like I have a testimony, which is people who come with a past story always encourage me how much they like to hear my story. But for me, I've always known the Lord. I was raised in an amazing family. So I feel lacking a little bit in the ability to reach people who are in a dark spot. And it's only by the grace of the Lord that I'm able, because he allows me to see what I don't know. I'm reaching past our point here, but I don't often share my testimony because of feeling like I don't have much of one. But it's more along the lines of just sharing the story of the Lord when the people ask me, but mainly just being kind.
Well, the best testimony is the one you have. The second best testimony is a life always lived for Jesus. Like, that's the goal in our kids' minute, right? We want you, if you never walk away from Jesus, you're going to avoid so many things in life that are destructive and harmful. And so I'm jealous of your testimony.
The only reason why I'm not as thankful I say not as thankful for my testimony. Really, the only reason why I wish I had more of a story is because I feel like it helps to compel those who also have a story, as opposed to them feeling like you don't understand, Nicole, which I've gotten.
You could just make it up. This used to say dope dealer, and I was slinging. No, you probably don't. You don't lie for the Lord. That's a different podcast. Tune in March. We'll tell you how to make up testimonies to win people to the kingdom. No, we're not going to do that. That's really helpful. Do you think that the shirts are something that if anyone wore them, like, it would bring attention, it would bring conversation? And like, if you're unwilling to try to do it, but you're like, well, I'll just make it happen by wearing a shirt. Like, do you feel like, since you have experience with the shirts, like, would it make any person, no matter who you are, no matter what your like face is when you're out in public, like if you put a shirt on that said something Christian-ish or something that was like drawing people in, would it just do it to anyone? Do you feel like?
So the hard thing is, like, if I'm wearing my Hope Dealer shirt in the gym and I'm like having a totally bad attitude and throwing things around and swearing at people, I know me and swearing. I still love people who swear. I just don't do it. That's a bad representation. And that would be more of making people think poorly on Christianity, which I think that comes easy to people anyways. So I would only encourage those who want to live a life as an example to wear the t-shirts. And yes, it definitely brings attention. I think I'd want to do a study. My degree's actually in psychology. I would want to do a study to have me wear my shirt and not smile at anyone and see if I get as much responses, because I am also known for looking people in the eye and smiling. So I think that probably helps.
We should do that.
We should do
We'll do a follow-up to this podcast, and we'll send you out with like a nasty
I don't
attitude.
know if I cannot smile.
You can like just mean mug people. We'll do like a 90-minute go to the gym and just give people dirty looks with your "I love Jesus"
Oh my
shirt
goodness.
on, and see how that goes. Because I wonder.
So Aaron and I, my husband and I, have done kind of a little bit of a study. He had a shirt on that wasn't a Jesus shirt, but I forget what it had on it, but he had a shirt that he loved. It's probably something with his Oak Island show that he loves, and he thought he'd get a lot of attention for it. And I had one of my Jesus shirts on. I forget which one. And we went out one day on a date, and it was like a challenge to see who would get more t-shirt comments. I did. But I more naturally like engage people when I'm walking up, I'm looking at them, where he's a dude. He's like, so where are we going? What's happening? You know?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily just the shirt. It's also you got to carry an approachable attitude, which probably followers of Christ should have anyway. But I get it. Like sometimes I just want to get through this line at the grocery store. I don't want to be talked to or approached. And my kids will laugh because we joke that I have a certain face when I'm out. But it doesn't deter anyone because people talk to me all the time randomly about grocery stuff, about random things. And like, listen, stranger, I don't want to have this interaction right now. But I'm not like trying to drive it away. So there is something to, I think, the way we carry ourselves outside or at work. Maybe it's different owning a business now as well. But how do you deal with a workplace that maybe restricts some of the things that you can say or do? Like you probably can't be proselytizing students, although that'd be cool. But you shouldn't do it if you're not allowed to.
You know, the first person that ever shared with me about the Lord was a fellow teacher. My very first teaching job ever, I was like 22 or 23 on the school campus. I'm so grateful because he didn't care and he just shared with me. So I've been able to see, you know, what the result can be. So you have to use wisdom. But if God opens the door, I tend to walk through it. You ought to obey God rather than men, right? So I've never had any kind of an issue about that in any way, nothing problematic. And, you know, one of the challenges of working in the public schools is you come face to face with just a lot of horrendous situations, you know, especially being in special education. And there are just a lot of situations for families, for students that need a supernatural answer. I mean, there isn't just an easy way for these problems to be fixed. They need God to intervene. When I know I have what's going to help. So, yeah, I mean, I have prayed with students, I've prayed with families, and just try to really be led by the Lord and when I do that and how I do that. You know, all the people that I work with want what's best for children. They want what's best for families.
Just to note, if you lose your job for talking about Jesus, Jackie told you to do it. Pastor Sean says, follow what your boss says unless the Lord tells you to do it. If you lose your job, email Jackie. But yeah, that makes sense, right? Like, especially if it's the Lord, you have to do it. And even if it does cost you your job, like you got to do what the Lord tells you to do. What's it like if you own a solo business. If you told yourself no talking about Jesus, that would be weird.
2 examples. So that for me, like I said, I was making my music be more kosher for everybody, and I changed that. I have had situations where I knew somebody coming to my studio did not believe as I did. And even I knew somebody coming to my studio spoke to demons, like very different from my lifestyle. I was a little bit torn on if I wanted that to come into my studio, but I also felt compelled that if I wasn't willing to love her, who would? So I prayed a lot before she came. I didn't know if her way of life would clash, obviously, with mine, because we both are going to know, because I'm not going to shy away from who I am either. I ended up having a great time with her. I kept topics away from that, asked about other things in her life, wasn't afraid to share things about my life, but it was nerve-wracking. And in the world today, standing up for something can be scary when you own a business, especially during all of the cancel culture stuff. I believe in Jesus Christ. I believe in husband and wife. There's a lot of things that I believe that if I say something about that, I could lose not only a client, but if enough people came against me, I could lose my business. But I sat in my studio one day and looked around and I told the Lord during a time when it was more difficult, I just looked at my space and said, Lord, it's yours. So, just like potentially losing your job, potentially losing my business, if I lost it, what's next? We're moving on. With my son, he recently came to me. He had worked for a large company. In the training for working there, it talked about not having any kind of conversation with coworkers about faith. And he was so offended. He's like, when I'm in the break room, that's my own time. But it literally spelled out, not even in the break room, don't talk about it. And so we had the conversation. If the Lord puts it on your heart, don't worry about what the job says, because he's either going to make a way through for you in that scenario, or he'll provide another job if you lose it. But if he puts it on your heart to do it, I'm going to stand with you that if you lose your job, he's got one for you. If he's asked you to do something and you do it, it can be scary. My son was a teenager when he saw this. So it's easy to be like, there's other jobs. When you're a mom providing for a family or a husband providing for a family, whatever, and you're an adult, it gets more scary. It's more difficult to stand firm knowing you could lose it all. But what is all? We are here to know the Lord and to make him known. That's our job. And that's what I told my son. And that's how I feel about my studio. So as I'm doing that job, if it makes me lose some of the world's fluff, which is a job, and if that's scary, he's going to be with me. My favorite verse says he didn't give me a spirit of fear. And when the world tries to put that on me, I speak that verse to myself and then keep taking a step forward, even if it's forward in fear.
He didn't give you a spirit of fear. The verse says what he did give you is sound mind, right? To make good decisions, love, power, I think is how that verse goes. Tell the people what in the world can they do to more effectively live on mission and live out their faith when they're at work?
I would say, first of all, it's just a privilege to get to share with people about the Lord, just to kind of switch the dialogue a little bit. As somebody who didn't get to do that for a number of years, and now I have a lot of interface with people that don't know the Lord, it really is a privilege and a blessing. So we just ask God for what we need. I fall short every day, but we just lean into him and just trust him in every situation to give us the words or show us what to do. And as we make those little baby steps, as Nicole talked about, he's faithful and he'll help us.
In short, I had thoughts of keep it real and do it scared, but with keep it real, we're all on a journey with the Lord. So I have known the Lord my whole life. For somebody who maybe, like you said, when you first came to know the Lord, you didn't know quite what to do, and your work got to see you grow in him. So keep it real would really fall along the lines of keep growing, keep striving for what the Lord has for you and learning to do the life that he's given you better and do it scared. Because even like I said, having known the Lord my whole life, having seen people healed, having been healed myself, having seen people come from horrible accidents to being healed, I'm still scared. Almost every time the Lord put something on my heart. So just continuing to grow, continuing to really be true to the Lord, who the Lord has you to be, so that people can grasp from you that they can trust you. Because if you don't continue to walk faithfully and consistently, then they'll write you off just as soon as you yell at somebody that, as soon as you show them you're just like everyone else, they'll write you off. And there's times when, as Christians, we do fail and flip out or whatever, but going to the person and making it right is part of keeping it real.
Yeah, that's really good. I would just add, you have to be different. The reason I didn't want to go to church with my friends who invited me before I was a Christian was they were just like me, except they went to youth group on Wednesday night. They cussed like I cussed. They talked like I talked. They didn't care about the things there was no difference. So I was like, I don't want to add to have to go to church. Like, that sounds awful. And I didn't know what church was, but there was nothing different. And so part of what drew me to Amanda when she brought me was like, there's something different. She's actually kind. Whatever this Jesus thing she's talking about, has changed her in some way. Same thing for me, right? I became different at that workplace of he was brand new Christian in month 1 at that job. And by 2 years later, totally different. Mm-hmm. I left that job to go to Bible college. So lots of work that the Lord did. But if we don't live different, and if we're not willing to do it afraid or scared, I don't know how you can see something, because if you're just like everybody else, they don't need Jesus. He's obviously not helping you because you're just like me. Mm-hmm. That is our talk for the month. Hopefully you can share that with people who who might be having a tough time at work or just need some encouragement. I want to thank you guys for joining us. I think we're calling these Adobe Conversations. If not, we'll start calling them that because that's what I envisioned it being called. And so thank you guys for being here. Thank you for sharing. Thanks for encouraging our people. And if you're watching, we'll catch you next month. Thanks for listening. To learn more about Adobe Christian Church and connect with our community, visit adobecc.org. Like, share, subscribe. Let's continue to be transformed by the power of Jesus together. We'll catch you next time.